Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. This show is being recorded on June 5th, 2023. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
And here are the major topics we'll touch on today. The Armenian-Azerbaijani negotiations continue this week in Kishinev and Bratislava. Also, the deputy prime ministers met in Moscow to discuss details of opening communication links between the two countries. So we'll continue analyzing the results. Israeli President Isaac Herzog was in Azerbaijan for a state visit. We'll discuss the relations between those two countries and the effect it has on our region. Over the weekend, Pashinyan attended Erdogan's inauguration as president of Turkey. Why? But we'll talk about it anyway. Finally, we'll do a quick brush-up on the current state of Armenia-Russia relations. To talk about these issues, we have with us Sergei Melkonian, who is an expert at the Russian International Affairs Council. He has worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation and has served as assistant to the President of Armenia, Armen Sarkisyan, on Russia and Middle East politics. He is CEO and chief editor of the analytical portal International Studies and a co-founder of the Armenian Project NGO. Welcome back to the show, Sergei. Glad to have you with us again.
Welcome, Sergei.
Thank you. Welcome.
Sergei, May was a very busy month in the continuing Azerbaijani-Armenian so-called peace negotiations. The saga continues so far in June, and there are meetings scheduled all the way until, I believe, either October or December. This past week started with a meeting on June 1st as a five-way summit between Pashinyan, Aliyev, Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany, and Presidents Macron and Michel of France and the EU, respectively. The main topics on the table, it seems to be all of the topics on the agenda, which is unblocking the regional transport and economic infrastructures, border delimitation and demarcation, as well as security between the two countries, I guess, normalization of relations, rights and security of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, and POWs. At the end, President Michel was the only one who made a statement and said that the meeting was a good preparation for another one that's coming up on July 21st. We should mention that a few days before this meeting, Armenia's Security Council Chair Armen Grigoryan and Aliyev's Foreign Policy Advisor Hikmet Hajiev met in Bratislava to prepare for this meeting, and they held a panel discussion. The only thing we heard from Grigoryan was that Azerbaijan should refrain from maximalist positions. What did you gather from all these meetings in Bratislava and Kishinev? What was achieved?
To be honest, we cannot record any real progress or some results. After meeting in the United States, as far as I know, Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed at least on 2 or 3 points of whole agreement. The next step should be fifth trilateral statement. I mean, Pashinyan, Aliyev, and Putin, that should be signed in Moscow. But they didn't agree in some points. So, as I said, it was postponed. But Russia tried to keep under control the process of unblocking of communications to not shift the discussion to Brussels or to Washington. And Moscow is okay if Armenia and Azerbaijan agree something in Brussels or in the United States, then to record or to fix it in Moscow. There are at least two important points during negotiations that we can underline. First is that Armenia officially recognized Artsakh as a part of Azerbaijan. It partly changed the framework of whole discussion around peace agreement. And the second point is the issue of so-called enclaves. This issue was raised in 2021 from Azerbaijani side. But then, as far as I know, Russia tried to block this point because it was really complicated to add in all agreement. It should be a really huge obstacle to reach peace, etc., etc. And it was one more trouble point for Moscow in this region, because from their perspective, they also should to review their position regarding, for example, to Kazakhstan, because I would like to mention just a couple months ago, there was a 125th meeting, Russia-Kazakhstan meeting on demarcation and delimitation of the border. So
125 meetings, huh? Okay.
Yeah, 125 meetings, and they didn't finish it yet. For example, Russia-Azerbaijan demarcation delimitation process, it took almost 20 years. So it's not one-day process. And this is Russian position during negotiations when Aliyev tried to push forward this agenda. Russian MFA position is, hey, we were negotiating during 20 years and you want to solve this issue with Armenia just for one day. So it's impossible. Just hold on. And this issue was postponed. I mean, the so-called enclaves in Tavush and in Arat Mars. But then Azerbaijan tried to reach as much as possible when Russian positions are weak, Armenian positions are weak, and Baku realized that neither European Union nor the United States are not ready to impose any sanctions on Azerbaijan in case of aggression, etc., etc. So in all this configuration, they say that they still have this window of opportunity. So they raise the issue of so-called enclaves, and Armenia also agreed on this position. So this is not any kind of consensus because it's only unilateral concession, only from Armenian side on both positions that are extremely from security perspective.
Yeah, in fact, going to that topic, the Armenian side keeps talking about 1975 maps as being used for border delimitation and demarcation, despite the fact that Russia has said that it has even more historic maps in the archives of the Russian, army. And another point was about these villages, these Armenian villages that Pashinyan claims to be enclaves that started appearing starting from 1926. In fact, we had interviewed Ruben Galichan, who's an expert in cartography, and it said that before 1926, Armenia had a direct contact with Artsakh. There was no so-called Lachin corridor, and there were no enclaves or so-called enclaves. So, but we know that Pashinyan has insisted that border delimitation and demarcation must begin basically only on the condition that Azerbaijan sets, which is, they define when they, so I don't know what they're negotiating if they're establishing preconditions. But my question is, okay, Azerbaijan really wants to, begin and it wants to establish some preconditions for these discussions. Why is Pashinyan so much interested in the 1975 maps, especially given what I said about the 1926 maps? Why is Pashinyan insisting or talking about agreeing to so-called enclaves? What is Armenia's interest in all of this?
Yeah, this issue is complicated because I didn't see the 1975 year map. It's complicated to find, but when I was working at present administration, I still have copies from two maps, if I'm right, 1988 or 1986. I didn't find any enclaves, and there was also any Lachin corridor. There was a direct connection between Sunni Mars and Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Republics. There was no any kind of corridor. There were just two territories that were connected. Also on Vardenis direction, the whole territory around Sotk was also under Armenian control. There were no just any even meters that should be under Azerbaijani SAR control. So from Armenian national interest, Armenian state interest, we should continue our negotiations based on this map. 2 days ago, I found 1973 and 1974 years map, and their situation was different. There are so-called enclaves, there is Lachin corridor, and part of Sotk is not fully under Armenian control. And if we move southward from Sotk, there are also some territories that are not fully under our control. They are partly under Azerbaijani control. I think the point is, as we agree that Armenian main goal today is to reach peace agreement with Turkey. So Armenia should sign any kind of peace agreement with Azerbaijan as soon as possible. But if Armenia continues to negotiate with Azerbaijan, promoting its position based on national interest, for example, on this map that I've mentioned before, that will postpone this peace agreement. It means it will postpone the peace deal with Turkey. So, and if we agree that peace deal with Turkey is the main goal. So Armenia wants to solve all issues with Azerbaijan, both regarding Artsakh, regarding enclaves, regarding communications, as soon as possible. I think that that's the point, because I don't have any arguments why Armenia should continue negotiations based on this map.
Right. And also, it's interesting the location of the negotiations, because it appears that they were discussing maps and they were discussing specific square meters of each other's territories in Brussels and not in Moscow, which would have the more accurate map. Do you think that the previous week's meeting, which was in Moscow, it took only, I think, 20 minutes? What's your assessment about that meeting, and why did it take so short? Do you think basically it was like Aliyev and Pashinyan trying to pretend that they're negotiating, but actually move the forum of the negotiations more away from Russia to EU?
Yeah,
what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, that's really the right question, because from Azerbaijani perspective, Moscow platform is not in favor. Because, for example, let's analyze the whole agreements. For example, April 2022, last year, after the meeting in the EU, Pashinyan stated that international community asks us to reduce our expectations regarding Nagorno-Karabakh. So, and he didn't explain what does it mean. So it was after the meeting with Aliyev in the EU. Then there was, for example, meeting in Moscow when they discussed, when Russia promoted position. So the future of status of Nagorno-Karabakh, we can leave to our next generations. So we shouldn't focus on this case. Let's freeze it somehow, etc., etc. Obviously, that was from Russian interest to keep their presence, but it also was from our interest to keep the status unclear, because other perspective was to recognize Artsakh as a part of Azerbaijan, as it was after meeting in Prague, when Armenia stated that we are ready to continue negotiations based on Almaty Declaration. Then after meetings in the United States and in EU, Armenia stated that Yerevan recognized Artsakh as a part of Azerbaijan. But this achievement, they were impossible for Azerbaijan during negotiations in Moscow. So this is why Aliyev prefers to continue negotiations more in EU or United States rather than in Russia. I think that's the point.
Well, speaking of Moscow, after some delays, the deputy prime ministers of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia met on June 2 in Moscow. According to Russia's Overchuk, sides have achieved further common understanding, as he called it, on how to restore the railway between Yerevan, Julfa, Mehri, and Horadiz.
Yeah.
This falls in the first item that Hovik mentioned a little while ago, unblocking of regional transport and infrastructure, and linking Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan, which is probably the only thing that's pressing on Aliyev's mind these days. Can you tell us what you think was achieved at this meeting? Can the deputy prime ministers really achieve any progress when the summit people are not declaring any kind of real common understanding, like, for example, at Kishinev? Or are the leaders not telling us, the public, what is really being discussed and agreed to? What's going on?
As far as I know, Armenia and Azerbaijan reached an agreement regarding unblocking of communications.
Mm-hmm.
And now they are discussing only technical details, like who is going to control, for example, border from this side, or who is going to control border from this side. Who can, for example, take Azerbaijani passport and check it? Who cannot do that? So they're discussing these technical details, because before Aliyev and Nicole agreed that the communication we have, on at least on this issue, we don't have any controversial points in our positions. So let's continue working on this way. And a Russian position was, okay, guys, if you agreed, if you are okay, so we can continue working on it under my control, because Armenia is a part of Eurasian Economic Union, Armenia is a part of our common security space, etc., etc. So I can be involved in such process and facilitate whole technical details. For example, if you can't agree who can verify or who can check identity cards or passports from both sides, I can be a mediator in these cases. So they are just now discussing only technical details. The agreement, at least at this point, has reached. So we are waiting for how this should work on the ground. I mean, regarding the railway station and the route communications.
So uncharacteristically, in the last few days, for example, Alen Simonian from the Speaker of the Parliament declared that there would be no corridor, which we assume was about this so-called Zankizur corridor that Aliyev keeps talking about, and that Armenia will not sign any agreement that gives it less than 29,800 square kilometers, etc. And today, I think Armen Grigoryan had stated that Armenia will have complete control of its borders. Whatever comes in, whatever goes out, there will be Armenian customs. Is this what you are talking about? Are you saying that there's common understanding that Armenia is going to control the customs?
As far as I know, this statement was out the whole framework from whole agreement that was reached in Moscow. I mean, Armen Grigoryan's statement, as far as I know, it has nothing with the general agreement between Nikol Aliyev and Putin in Moscow. Because from the agreement that they reached before, even last year, they agreed that Russians should be at these communications. Somehow, there should be their presence also according to November 9 statement. But later, they discussed where, for example, they can have their checkpoints, etc., how many personnel they can have on Armenian soil. So they're discussing these technical details. And when I heard from Armen Grigoryan yesterday that there won't be any Russian presence, only Armenians will control, I was really surprised because there was no such discussion, at least in Moscow. Right. Probably when they continue negotiations in Brussels or in Chisinau, maybe they agreed somehow at this point, but at least from Moscow, they didn't discuss such things.
Yeah, this surprised me as well because the clarity was very surprising. Usually they waffle on their declarations, but it was extremely clear in this case. And they even called some of those points red lines. But you know, Sergei, one thing that they left out of their red lines was the dialogue between Baku and Stepanakert, which they called highly important. They didn't say that was a red line for them. Have Armenia and Azerbaijan come to some sort of an understanding that we don't know of about this? Is this a point that is negotiable for Armenia? For example, it is okay for Baku and Stepanakert to start some kind of a dialogue, but Armenia is not going to be interested in what the outcome is. They will sign an agreement based on the start of negotiations.
Armenia now is totally out of any issues in Nagorno-Karabakh, starting from economic, political, etc., etc. Azerbaijan doesn't want to have any mediator at direct meetings with Stepanakert, even Russians. They don't want to have Russians as a mediator there. Armenia, at least at the level of statement, they are working on some international mechanism, etc., etc. But Azerbaijan clearly understand that it's impossible, that they will reject any international mechanism regarding, from their perspective, to negotiations with so-called their people, their citizens in Azerbaijan. So that they will block it, and it will not work. But it doesn't mean that Armenia will stop the peace process based on that. If this point fails, I mean, some international mechanism of negotiation between Baku and Stepanakert, if this point fails, Armenia will not stop the peace deal. So this is not that obstacle that, okay, this is a red line for us. No, this is not the red line for Armenia today, because Armenia officially recognized Nagorno-Karabakh as a part of Azerbaijan. So it means that any Armenian position or statement regarding Nagorno-Karabakh is an interference into internal affairs of Azerbaijan. So this is why Baku legally can block any Armenian attempts or statement to be somehow involved in peace process on its so-called its territory. So this is why Armenia doesn't have any tools to make pressure, for example, even in Moscow, Brussels, or in other platforms, because Aliyev can legally state that, hey guys, you just recognize that it's our territory. What are you going to do with this issue? So you have nothing to do here.
So in light of what you just said, and the fact that the West has clearly indicated that it is not ready to provide any kind of security guarantees for Armenia and Armenians, does Pashinyan's strategy have any possibility for a positive outcome?
I don't see any possibility for positive outcome, to be honest, because we clearly understand that the main obstacle for this whole decades was the case of Nagorno-Karabakh. Then Azerbaijan raised stakes and talking about so-called enclaves. Then they will rise stakes and talk about Azerbaijanis who lived in Armenia and how they should come back. Armenia should guarantee their security, etc., etc. So they will rise stakes until the point that they see is it possible. This is why probably Pashinyan see that this might be a red line for us. This is why it's better to sign a peace deal today rather than tomorrow, probably.
Sergei, we have read reports and of course, seen reports by the Russian peacemakers, by the Ministry of Defense or the Defense Army of Artsakh, every day almost in the last week, indicating that there are new provocations from Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan itself is spreading fake news that Armenians have breached the ceasefire. How do you assess the potential for violence against Artsakh at this point in time?
I can share some insight that I had at least 1 month ago. As far as I know, Azerbaijan was preparing for a so-called counter-terrorist operation in Nagorno-Karabakh against Artsakh Defense Army, against Artsakh police, etc. And it should be, from their perspective, it should be in parallel with the Ukrainian counteroffensive. But as we see, Ukrainian counteroffensive, it didn't start. Probably this is why they postponed some of their actions, but it doesn't mean that they rejected to follow their goals, their plans. They are ready to continue to make pressure. We saw Aliyev's statement regarding President of Artsakh, Parliament of Artsakh, etc., etc. This is why they're continuing their preparatory work to do this so-called counter-terrorist operation. And as you mentioned, peacekeepers, they record violence every day, at least last 1 month. I can say that in Russia, there are two positions on this issue. First, the position of military bloc is really clear. They are ready to act somehow. This is why they appointed, as they call, 3-star general that close with the head of MOD. So this is not 1-star general, it was before 3 times. Because the problem is that all issues in Nagorno-Karabakh related to security cases, they should be solved on the ground. So there is no time to connect with the Rostov, the South Military District. South Military District will connect with the Moscow General Staff, the General Staff with then ask South Military District, and then they will come back to Stepanakert. So we don't have, Russians don't have so much time for that options. This is why they appointed this general who has mandate to solve issues on the ground as quick as possible. This is why they are ready to act, even regarding to, they were ready to act at least regarding to so-called checkpoint on Lachin corridor. But time works against both Russia, Armenia, and Nagorno-Karabakh. So as long as there is checkpoint, the positions of Russians and our defense army in Artsakh become weaker and weaker. And there is second position in Russia. Like this checkpoint, Lachin corridor issues and other cases, they should be solved in all peace deal pack. So we can move forward on this direction because, for example, Azerbaijan and Armenia, they can reject to continue negotiate peace deal on Moscow platform. There is such risk. In this case, both sides, they won't take into account, for example, Russian interest. For example, in unblocking communications, establishing checkpoints on Armenia-Azerbaijan border, etc., etc. So there are two different points: military bloc that is ready to act somehow, and those who focus more on political dialogue that try to freeze all sensitive issues for both sides.
So you're actually saying that Baku was sort of coordinating with Ukraine to escalate on two fronts against Russian defended positions?
This was an insight from some of my European colleagues who are familiar with developments in Ukraine.
Very interesting. Can the November 2020 statement be considered null and void, considering pretty much all the signatories are in breach of the agreement that they signed? Is there anything to adhere to, technically speaking, at this point?
This is why Russia tried to create a so-called trilateral statements format. There are already 4 trilateral statements on the highest level. As I mentioned in the very beginning, that they were preparing the 5th one to sign at the last meeting. And the point is, in each new statement, all new development, they should be recorded if both sides agrees. For example, at one of the statements, there was recorded that both sides continued to negotiate based on Almaty Declaration. But this agreement was reached not in Moscow, but it was fixed and recorded in Moscow trilateral statement. Then, for example, after Azerbaijani aggression, at last trilateral statement that was signed in Moscow, there was recorded that both sides, they won't use force or use pressure to achieve their goals, etc., etc. So they try to, they became reactive, I mean, rather than proactive. But still, these statements are the basis of negotiations. If we analyze not only November 9th statement, but if we also analyze the last trilateral statement, unfortunately, these two documents, they are basis of this peace deal.
Another important development that happened last week, Sergei, was that Israeli President Herzog visited Azerbaijan. Earlier this year, Azerbaijan opened an embassy in Tel Aviv, and although there's a lot of pretense around economic and energy ties, I think all the experts agree that the big elephant in the room is defense and Iran specifically. Herzog again reiterated Israel's longstanding claims that Iran is the biggest threat in the region, while on the same day or the day after, Azerbaijan warned its citizens not to travel to Iran, citing earlier attacks on its consulate in Tabriz earlier in the year, months ago. So it seems to be both countries are committed to keeping Iran as the regional bogeyman, and they are overtly or covertly working to isolate Iran. But taking a step back and at a higher level, how would you assess and describe the core of the relationship between Israel and Azerbaijan?
Israel continues to conduct its so-called, its non-official, new peripheric strategy. It's based on creation of points of pressure on its main threat. Today, the main threat from Israeli perspective is Iran. This is why Israel did a lot to create its zones of presence to use as a point of pressure on Iran. First, and the most important today is Azerbaijan. Before that, Israel reached agreement with some Gulf states. Then, if you see, Israel also opened an embassy in Turkmenistan. This is also a Caspian Sea state. So they tried to surround Iran with their diplomatic, economic, technical, and other presence, then to convert into political tool that they can use against Iran. So as we see their coalition, I mean, Israeli coalition that was created, and they're working for a long time in the Middle East, it cracked because, for example, in times of Israel, there was an article that Iran is creating its joint naval force with Saudi Arabia, Arab Emirates, and Oman. At this whole construction, the role of Azerbaijan rise extremely dramatically. So the only ally of Israel on all this region is Azerbaijan. And the most important statement was when embassy of Azerbaijan opened in Israel, there was an official statement that Azerbaijan and Israel, they share common threats in the region. It means that Azerbaijan indicates Iran as a same threat to itself as Israel indicates Iran as a threat to itself. So they are not just partners, they are strategic partners or they're strategic allies in this case. Then the visit of Herzog was more symbolic rather than some political achievement. It was a symbolic because the whole wide range direction of cooperation was already covered before this visit. So they didn't sign any new agreement, etc., etc. For example, last days in Azerbaijan was also head of Knesset Committee of Security, Yulia Edelstein. They had a lot of meetings, visits related to security issues, etc. So yes, answering your question, yes, Azerbaijan sees Iran as a big problem, and they see Israel as a good partner and ally that can somehow rebalance Iranian presence, Iranian influence in the region. For example, also the case of Zangezur corridor. From Israeli perspective, this is in favor of Israel interest because the Zangezur corridor will block Iran from the north. This is why they're also trying to promote this issue in media. And if we analyze, for example, articles of Israeli experts and scholars that they issued, for example, at the beginning of this year and the end of last year, they clearly state that, for example, the problem is not only Iran, the problem is also Russia. And I was surprised that I read this article just today, but it was published in the end of last year. There was mentioned that Israel prepared Azerbaijan to 2020 war, provided all assistance, starting from military, intelligence, etc. But also, Israel saved Azerbaijan. Why? Because in the end of the war, according to Israeli expert, Russia used Iskander to strike to Baku, and Israeli air defense system protected Baku, and only after that Aliyev decided to sign this November 9 agreement. We know that Barak 9 system, surface-to-air missile system,
Yes.
there is in Azerbaijan, yeah.
Yeah, the Iron Dome is the other word
This
for
is
it.
not Iron Dome. Azerbaijan wanted to have Iron Dome, but Iron Dome it's a little bit different. They have Barak 9 system. And we had an information that there was something in Baku in the night from November 9 to November 10, but we couldn't indicate what exactly what is. But according to Israelis that visited Azerbaijan several times, had meetings at their Azerbaijani Diplomatic Academy, etc., they published some articles where they indicated that Russians used Iskander to make pressure on Aliyev to sign the agreement, but our Barak
Air
system,
defense, yeah.
their air defense system, they helped Azerbaijan, and now they are preparing to go deeper and deeper in their military technical cooperation, provide probably new tools of surveillance and other stuff that they can use against Iran. But the point is that I'm trying to promote in Israel for a long time that all sources that you provide to Azerbaijan, they are not going to use against Iran. They are using against both Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh.
Does Israel care? Like, actually, one of the questions I was thinking about asking is, I mean, yes, I understand that Israel wants to put pressure on Iran, but if the entire region of Caucasus is destabilized, and if it goes beyond control, would it be still in Israel's benefit if that happens?
Yeah, the point is, if Israel continues to pump up Azerbaijan with its military equipment, definitely Iran wants to pump the same way Armenia. So we are opening window of opportunity to spread Iranian influence in the region. But if you stop pumping up Azerbaijan, there is no reason to Iran to spread its influence, because when we were talking with the Iranian colleagues, they clearly said that unfortunately South Caucasus was not even on our top 5 foreign policy priorities before 2020 war. That is clear, because their priority was Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, etc. But now the position of South Caucasus rise dramatically because of Israeli presence, because Israel has its presence in 7 kilometers far from Iranian border in occupied Kovsaka. So that's the point that we're working on to spread in Israel. Like, please stop pumping up Azerbaijan. This will lead to reducing Iranian influence that you want to have.
Sergei, has Russia responded to the Iskander M allegations that you mentioned?
No, they didn't say anything on this point.
Interesting.
Another quick question. In one of our previous episodes, our guest Artur Martirosyan said that Israel currently prefers to stoke separatist sentiment in Iran in hopes of basically weakening the country from the inside, and won't prefer active military conflict because there's also some internal problems in Israel. Do you agree with that assessment? Or in other words, what is the assessment for potential active warfare between Iran and Israel, which means probably at least a big regional war, if not more bigger?
It's really complicated to imagine direct Iran-Israel confrontation, at least because there is no border between two countries. Israel continues to make its strikes on Syrian soil, on Iranian positions and Iranian proxy positions based in Syria. But the important thing that, at least for today, Iran didn't answer. So Iran didn't bomb Israeli territory from Syria, at least for today. So Iran tries to avoid a direct confrontation with Israel, at least from Syrian territory. But for example, Iran answered when they bombed US military position in North Iraq. There was also some Israeli presence in the same place. So it means that also the problem is that not only Iran tries to avoid direct confrontation, because it will nullify all achievement that they had in Syria, for example. Also, Israel is not ready for direct confrontation with Iran. And that's today's biggest problem in Israel-US relations. At least today, Netanyahu didn't meet Biden. I mean, the prime minister, when Netanyahu was elected as a prime minister, he didn't meet his strategic ally country president because they have a lot of contradiction. And the most important is Iranian case. So US is not ready to act actively against Iran, because if, for example, we analyze US strategic foreign policy documents, the top priority is also, it's not Russia, top priority is China, then Russia, and then Iran. So and not Korea. So Iran on the third or fourth position. And as I see, US is not ready to allocate a lot of resources to deter Iran in Middle East or in other regions, because the top priority are different. And for Israel, of course, they need both their strategic ally to act preventively, and they need also the coalition. But as I mentioned before, there is a crack in this coalition that they are working for a long time. So this is why I don't see any indicators that we can say, like in short term or in mid-term perspective, that might be a direct confrontation between Israel and Iran.
Okay, I'll turn us to the West. Over the past weekend, Erdogan was inaugurated for a third term as president of Turkey. On May 28th, he was elected with 52% of the vote, and the vote was tipped in his favor by ultra-nationalist party leader Sinan Oğan. Pashinyan attended and was treated as a bit of a second-class leader, sitting behind Azerbaijan's President Aliyev on the first row. The first row was reserved for country leaders, and Erdogan shook all of their hands. For reference, Georgia sent Prime Minister Garibashvili, Russia sent Duma Speaker Volodin, and the US attended at the level of its ambassador to Turkey. Sergei, do you think Armenia should have sent a more symbolic person, for example, Vagan Khachaturian? What was the point of Pashinyan attending this?
I'm convinced that Armenia shouldn't send anyone to this inauguration, to be honest, because it doesn't have anything with our national interest. So we have Artsakh in blockade. We had Azerbaijani military pressure. We have Azerbaijan-Turkey joint military exercise that are obviously aimed against Armenia. Why we should send our officials there? Okay, at least one Khachaturian that Armenia sent to, for example, to Great Britain.
Right.
Also with it's at least Armenia could send, for example, Ruben Rubinyan, but he was in delegation with Nikol Pashinyan, but it's complicated to find him in different images and short, but he was there. He's a senior person who's responsible for Armenia-Turkey negotiations. But right. Armenia, I mean, de facto prime minister and decision makers, they decided that this is some historical momentum, and they will show the whole community and to Turkey that they have a goodwill to normalize relations, blah, blah, blah. But we can analyze the reaction in Turkish social media and Turkish newspapers, which image with Nikol Pashinyan was spread there. Like, it's terrible, because Armenia was imagined like we had big history of confrontation, right, and we won at this confrontation. And head of Armenia, he is an inauguration of our new sultan. So that was the discourse in Turkish social media. This is why I'm convinced that Armenia shouldn't send any official to Turkey.
Yeah, during ancient times, when one country defeated another, they kidnapped its leader and paraded him, and I think that was the message that was trying to be sent. if I understand it correctly.
Probably, yeah.
So were there other not publicly known meetings between Pashinyan and maybe other Turkish leaders? Are you aware of anything?
No, I don't know any unofficial meetings or negotiations, but we saw some images from the meeting between Nikol and Aliyev. I don't know what did they discuss there because there is no any official or non-official information.
Rather puzzling. So given that Erdogan's win was thanks to the Turkish nationalists, what can we expect from Turkey during Erdogan's third term in relations with Armenia, but also with Russia? Do you see any changes or modifications?
They will continue to do this way, the same way. The only change that might be is Turkish internal economic policy, but it has nothing with Armenia or with Russia. So Turkey will continue to conduct its foreign policy strategy that it was before.
Sergei, one of your areas of focus obviously is Armenia-Russia relations. You visited Russia frequently for academic conferences and have even hosted Russian colleagues and analysts, academics here in Armenia. In fact, I believe you were in Russia just recently. We have been hearing a lot of things in terms of Armenia-Russia relations, whether Armenia wants to change its political vector or not. Can you, in your own words, describe the state of Armenia-Russia relations in brief?
Thank you. There is one point that I would like to share. After whole meetings and events, I'm convinced that at least for today, Russia doesn't have its clear foreign policy strategy on South Caucasus. There is no clear strategy. They're convinced that they should keep their presence in the region and that's it. So this is not strategy. There is just a will or their goal, but there is no strategy how they are going to reach or to achieve this goal. And this is not good and not bad, or good and bad at the same time for us. This is good for the perspective that if they do not have clear strategy on what they should do in the region, we have a huge window of opportunity to work and to promote our agenda. This is exactly what Azerbaijan and Turkey are doing in Moscow today. They are promoting their agenda of how they see a stable South Caucasus with Russians, etc., and have a lot of benefits. We have the same window of opportunity. We can work at these unclear times to have the configuration that we would like to have in short term and in long term.
The mainstream Armenian political conception is that if Russia leaves Armenia, then it leaves the Caucasus. And in that case, then not only will Armenia become essentially a Turkish vilayet, but pan-Turkism will present a critical threat to Russia itself. Last week, or I believe the week before, there was a roundtable organized in Armenia, and one of the Russian commentators said that actually the idea of pan-Turkish threat to Russia is not such a big deal for them. Of course, they said, yes, Russia would like to stay in Armenia, but if it has to leave, it won't be hindered in doing so because of this pan-Turkism threat. Maybe we can talk about other threats, but in general, this idea that, whether pan-Turkism is a threat to Russia, especially to Russia's soft underbelly, how big of a worry is it for Russian experts, or is it not? It was interesting because in the roundtable, I found some Armenian commentators trying to convince the Russian guy that, this is a big threat for you, as if Russia, Armenians would know Russia's threats better than Russians themselves. So what is your thought on the whole issue?
Yeah, Russians are laughing when Armenians try to explain what is their interest, but this is exactly that we should do. I agree with you that I didn't find any expert that indirectly participate somehow in their decision-making process that really clearly understand pan-Turkism as a threat to Russia. They do not have this feeling that in short term or in long term, this is a big threat from Turkey. But to be honest, we should mention that what was happened in the beginning of Russian military campaign in Syria, when Turkey shut down, strike to Russian aircraft. I was in St. Petersburg that days. I saw how all Turkish presence was nullified, starting from their cultural center in the center of St. Petersburg, with Turkish business that is really huge in Moscow, construction, in real estate, etc., etc. There was zero in a couple days because they saw that this was a red line. You cross this red line, you'll be punished. But it was not from the perception that pan-Turkism, some attempts to make pressure on Russia, etc., etc. No, this was a pragmatic, some political reaction on Turkish. Then this is the problem. They don't have this.
Do you think they can
feeling.
counteract pan-Turkism with economic countermeasures then? Is that the lesson for them?
I'm not sure that they can counter this idea from economic perspective, at least in Central Asia, but they have China there, that China feels this threat to itself. I mean, pan-Turkey. And they clearly understand that Central Asia is their gate to all China and to Turkic-speaking regions in China. This is why, yes, it's for clear China is ready to keep Turkish, some pan-Turkish attempts far from Central Asia rather than Russia.
All right, let's wrap up our topics here. I'd like to ask each of you if there's been something on your mind this past week that you would like to talk about. Sergei, what's on your mind?
I'm back to Armenia, and I saw this wine festival in Yerevan. I'm just sharing my feelings. I saw this wine festival, and it's bigger than it was, for example, last year. And it was complicated for me. I wasn't there, and it was complicated to me to even go there because I know that Artsakh is in blockade. Our guys on the border, they're targeted every day, every night. And this totally different and opposite feeling in the center of Yerevan, it cannot illustrate the real situation in the region. And yeah, it was frustrating for me. Yeah, it was my first idea, my first feeling after your question that I would like to share with you.
Thank you for that. That's an interesting comment because I think it was 2 weeks ago that Artur Hachigian was telling us about some dancing event at the Cascade at a time like this. So many of our analysts are having thoughts and feelings such as yours. Hovik, what's on your mind?
Asbed, well, if you remember, weeks ago or maybe a month ago, Gayane Hakobyan, mother of fallen hero Jora Martirosyan, was arrested allegedly for attempting to kidnap Pashinyan, although the video evidence showed that he entered her car at will, and she claims that they were going to go to Yerevan. Anyway, this was a major, it's captured a lot of media attention, and there were some protests. But today, basically, they essentially decided to lock her up as pretrial detention, which is frequently used against opposition candidates. They want, I don't see how an elderly woman would be a threat to Pashinyan or even the continuing of the case. So anyway, what's new is this morning, the Court of Appeals decided to change her sentence to house arrest. So at least the woman could, serve her pretrial detention at her home, but only a few hours later, I guess during the day, that decision was reversed again, and she was sent to serve her pretrial detention in a more prison-like facility, specifically for pretrial detention. But it seems like this government is creating problems for itself. I don't see why they couldn't allow this woman to be at least at her home. Anyway, that's my pet peeve this morning or this evening.
Thank you, Hovik. All right, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, Sergei, for joining us.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sergei.
Thank you.
That's our show this week. We hope you found it useful. Please follow us on social media. We'll talk to you next week.